Some wounds do not bleed, but they never close. And tonight, as the fire burns low, one old name rises from the ashes of memory, a name that still has power over Jamie Fraser. The night is quiet, but Jamie's mind is not. He sits alone, staring into the fire, watching the flames move like ghosts. The room is warm, yet his hands feel cold. He has faced war, hunger, and loss. He has survived pain that would break most men. But there is one memory that still lives inside him, hidden deep where no one can see. It does not shout, it waits. And tonight it returns. It begins with a simple thought, a smell of smoke, the sound of boots on wood, a shadow against a wall. Small things, harmless things, but to Jamie, they mean something else. They carry him back to a time he wishes he could forget. A time when he was not the strong laird, not the loving husband, not the father. A time when he was simply a man trapped in darkness. There was a face tied to that darkness. Cold eyes. A cruel smile. A man who enjoyed control. A man who used fear like a weapon. That man was Black Jack Randall. Jamie closes his eyes, but the past does not fade. He remembers the cell. The chains, the sound of his own breath shaking in the silence. He remembers pain, yes, but worse than pain was the feeling of being powerless. For a man like Jamie, strength is everything. Honor is everything. And Randall tried to take both. Years have passed since those days. Randall is gone. The world has changed. Jamie has built a life filled with love and purpose. He has Claire Fraser by his side, the woman who helped him heal when he thought healing was impossible. She saw him at his weakest and did not turn away. She helped him stand again. But healing does not mean forgetting. Tonight, as the fire cracks and the wind moves outside, Jamie feels that old fear rise like smoke in his chest. Not because Randall lives, but because the memory does. And memory can be just as powerful as any living enemy. Jamie opens his eyes and looks into the flames. He tells himself he is stronger now. He tells himself the past has no hold on him. Yet his jaw tightens. His hand curls into a fist. The body remembers what the mind tries to bury. This is not about revenge. Not anymore. It is about scars that shaped him. The pain Randall caused did not destroy Jamie Fraser. It changed him. It made him harder in some ways, softer in others. It taught him the cost of cruelty. It taught him how deep darkness can go inside a human soul. And that is what troubles him most tonight. Because when a man has looked into true evil once, he never forgets the shape of its face. The fire burns lower. The house is still. But inside Jamie, the battle has begun again. Not with swords, not with guns, but with memory. And some battles are the hardest of all. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a nightmare. It was something much smaller, and that is what made it worse. Earlier that day, Jamie had been standing outside, watching the young men train. The sound of metal hitting metal filled the air. Swords clashed. Boots scraped the dirt. It should have been a normal sound. A strong sound. A sound of men learning to defend their home. But then one of the boys laughed. It was not a kind laugh. It was sharp, cold, too pleased with itself. And in that single moment, the world around Jamie Fraser shifted. The yard faded. The sun felt colder. The clash of swords no longer sounded like training. It sounded like chains, like doors closing, like a trap snapping shut. Jamie did not move at first. He stood still, eyes fixed ahead, but he was no longer present. His body was on the ridge. His mind was somewhere far darker. That laugh carried a memory, a voice he had fought for years to bury, the voice of Black Jack Randall. Randall had laughed like that, not loud, not wild, controlled, calm, as if pain were a game meant only for his amusement. Jamie's chest tightened. His breathing slowed, not from fear but from control. He had learned control the hard way. He would not show weakness in front of the men. He would not let the past rise in front of witnesses. But inside, the walls had already cracked. The young man who laughed did not mean harm. He did not know what his voice had done. He did not know he had opened a door Jamie kept locked with iron will. To others, it was just a sound. To Jamie, it was a key turning in a cell door. The training ended. The men left. The yard grew quiet again, but the silence did not help. Jamie walked slowly back toward the house. Each step felt heavy, as if the ground itself pulled at him. He told himself it was foolish. Randall was dead, gone, buried in history. A ghost with no power. So why did it feel like that ghost was standing just behind him? When he entered the house, he paused by the doorway. The room was warm, safe. The life he had built stood strong around him. And yet memory does not care about safety. It does not care about time. It waits for weakness. And sometimes it only needs a sound. Jamie placed his hand on the table, steadying himself. His fingers trembled for only a second, but that second was enough. The past had found a crack. He had faced armies. He had crossed oceans. He had lost and found love. But this was different. Because you can fight a man with a sword, you cannot fight a memory with steel. And as the day faded into night, Jamie knew something troubling. The past was not done with him. Not yet. Jamie knew the name before it even formed in his mind. Some memories carry themselves in whispers, in shadows that linger long after the sun has set. He did not need to speak it. He felt it cold, precise, unrelenting. Black Jack Randall. The man who had haunted his past carved fear into his very bones. His cruelty had shaped the man Jamie was today. It wasn't just the beatings. It wasn't just the endless nights chained in darkness. It was the way Randall had understood Jamie, the way he had studied him, dissected him, and taken pleasure in seeing him break. That knowledge, that terrible understanding, had followed Jamie like a shadow he could never shake. No matter the years, no matter the lands he crossed or the love he found, Randall's presence lingered, invisible but suffocating. Jamie sat by the fire, staring into the flames. He could almost see the faint outline of Randall's face flickering in the dancing light. The cruel smile. The narrow, calculating eyes. The mockery that had once been whispered in a cold dungeon now echoed in his mind with terrifying clarity. This was not just memory. This was a force, a ghost, that could invade even the strongest fortress of the heart. He remembered the first encounter, not as a boy, but as a man untested in the ways of suffering. Randall had made him understand the limits of control, the fragility of trust, and the raw, unrelenting hunger for dominance some men possessed. That knowledge had burned into Jamie like a brand. He had sworn he would never let another man, no matter how powerful, hold that much sway over him again. And yet, here it was, seeping into the quiet of his home, uninvited but impossible to dismiss. Randall's name was more than a memory. It was a symbol of every fear Jamie had conquered, every scar he had earned, and every hard lesson survival had taught him. Even now, the thought of that man made his pulse quicken. It reminded him that courage was not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. Claire had always noticed these moments. She did not pry. She did not push. She merely watched with understanding eyes, knowing that some shadows could not be dispelled with words. Jamie did not need her to speak. He needed her presence, a tether to the life he had built, to remind him that while Randall's ghost lingered, Jamie had endured. Jamie had survived. The fire crackled. The night pressed close against the windows, the wind whispering like voices from long ago. And in that darkness, Jamie allowed himself one thought, quiet but steady. The past had power, yes, but it did not own him. Not anymore. Yet he could not shake the feeling that remembering this foe was more than nostalgia. It was a warning. Shadows have a way of teaching lessons that the living world cannot. And tonight, Jamie knew the shadow of Randall was not content to remain in the past. It demanded attention. It demanded reckoning. This was not a story of vengeance, not yet. It was a story of survival, of a man who had walked through hell and carried the weight of it silently. And for Jamie, acknowledging the old foe, understanding him, feeling the pain and fear he once carried, was not weakness. It was preparation. Preparation for the battles yet to come, and a reminder that some enemies, though gone, never truly leave. The room was still again. Only the fire remained alive, flickering and warm, as if it understood the struggle within him. Jamie leaned back, letting the memory wash over him, not to surrender, but to claim it as part of himself. Every scar, every pang of fear, every lesson learned from that cruel man had shaped him into the man who could face anything, the man who could protect those he loved, and endure whatever the future held. Even as the shadow lingered, Jamie's resolve hardened. The old foe may live in memory, but Jamie Fraser lived in the present, and that made all the difference. Jamie's silence was a language all its own. Claire had learned it over the years, the slight tightening of his jaw, the distant gaze that no fire or conversation could reach, the slow, measured breaths that hid storms beneath calm. She had seen it before, in battles, in losses, in moments when the past clawed at him like a shadow that refused to leave. Tonight, that shadow had returned. She watched him from across the room, tending to the supper they had barely touched. Her hands moved, but her mind was on him. Jamie's eyes stared past her, past the flames, past the safety of their home. His body was present, but his mind walked a distant ridge of memory. She knew without words that the past had surfaced. "Jamie," she said softly, breaking the silence. The sound of her voice was gentle, careful, but it carried the weight of concern. He flinched slightly at hearing it, as though he had been caught at the edge of a cliff. The memory recoiled, but the moment was fragile. He turned toward her, eyes shadowed, holding secrets that even he could barely name. Claire stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm, grounding him. She did not press. She did not demand. She simply offered the tether he needed, a reminder that while memories could haunt, they could not define the present. "You're thinking about him again, aren't you?" she asked, not accusing, only stating what she already knew. Jamie's lips pressed into a thin line. She did not need confirmation. She had watched him wrestle with the ghosts for years, and she knew the signs. The subtle clenching of his fists, the way he would not meet her gaze fully, the distant pull of thoughts he could not let go. Jamie swallowed hard, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. The weight of what he carried, the old fear, the old pain, pressed down on him. It was heavy, but it was familiar. It was a part of him, just as much as his love for Claire, his honor, his strength. He had survived Randall before, and he would survive remembering him now. Claire reached for his hand. Her touch was warm, steady, a silent promise that she was there, that he was not alone. Jamie allowed himself a small nod, a gesture of acknowledgement. He did not need to explain. She understood. Some battles were fought in silence within the confines of the mind, and some victories were measured not in swords or blood, but in survival and understanding, in that quiet, shared space. Jamie felt a flicker of calm. The memory of his old foe was sharp, but Claire's presence softened the edges. She was a living reminder that while shadows may return, the light they had built together would always endure. And for Jamie, that was enough for now. Jamie sat alone in the study, the quiet stretching around him like a heavy cloak. The flicker of candlelight cast long shadows across the walls, but even they seemed pale compared to the shadow that had returned in his mind. The question gnawed at him. Was it truly over? Or had the past merely shifted shape, waiting for the right moment to strike again? He thought of Randall, the man who had taken so much, who had left marks deeper than any wound. Dead. Yes. History had closed that chapter. Yet Jamie could not shake the feeling that closure was a fragile thing. Memories, he had learned, were like embers. Even when the fire dies, the heat remains. And some embers can spark a blaze when you least expect it. The day's earlier incident, the laugh of a young man in training, had seemed trivial to anyone else. But Jamie knew better. It had been a trigger, a tiny crack in the wall of time, letting the past seep back into the present. He clenched his fists, trying to push it away, to tell himself that the danger was gone. And yet, he could not ignore the creeping suspicion. Perhaps the threat had never truly left. Perhaps some men, even dead, leave a mark that cannot be erased. Claire's presence was a balm. But even she could not banish this unease. She had taught him to face fear without letting it control him. She had shown him how to live despite the ghosts that trailed him. But tonight, the uncertainty was different. It was not just fear of memory. It was the whisper of unfinished business. A sense that the past was still tugging at the edges of the life they had built together. Jamie rose and walked to the window. The wind outside rattled the shutters softly, and for a moment, he expected to see a familiar figure standing there, watching him with cold eyes. Of course, there was nothing, just the night, the stars, and the quiet of their home. But the mind is not so easily fooled. It remembers the patterns of danger, the shapes of malice, and the echoes of cruelty. And sometimes, even ghosts can feel alive. He shook his head, a low, frustrated sound escaping his lips. Logic told him that Randall could no longer harm him. But instinct, the same instinct that had saved him countless times, whispered otherwise. Some enemies are not bound by life or death. They live on in memory, in fear, the vigilance you carry long after the threat is past. Jamie knew he could not let this uncertainty rule him. He would not cower before a shadow, even one as haunting as Randall. Yet he could not ignore it either. Awareness was survival. Memory was defense. And the question remained, had he truly survived the man he once feared most? Or was the danger merely waiting, ready to claim a new foothold in the life he had fought so hard to protect? The candle flickered again, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Jamie's jaw tightened. He had faced death, betrayal, and cruelty, and he had endured. He would endure this too, the memory, the doubt, the flickering threat of a foe, long gone, but never forgotten. The battle was not with swords, not with blood, but with vigilance, courage, and the resolve to confront the past without letting it undo him. And as he turned away from the window, Jamie Fraser knew one truth. Some threats may never be truly over, but he could be ready. He always had been,